Hello, everyone. I'm super excited because today we're launching U&AI's most recent series where we're focused on one key topic. How can we build AI that we can trust? So today I'm joined by one of my favorite executives in the transformational space who is solely focused on AI, John Napoli. How are you?
Fantastic. Love the intro, by the way. Pretty cool.
John, let's talk a little bit about you and your career to date and
Sure.
why you're our first guest on today's episode of U&AI, How We Can Build AI We Can Trust.
Sure. Happy to give some background. So I've been in financial service technology for about 30 years now, and I've been in part of my AI journey started about 2016 at JP Morgan Chase when I was the COO of technology overall. And since I've been kind of heavily involved in both machine learning and obviously more traditional, now more Gen AI. Love
Yeah.
it. What I do now, I work for a company called DTCC. DTCC is probably the most important company nobody knows unless you're really in financial services. So we
Yeah.
basically clear and settle all the trades at the end of the day. So what you do is all the big banks basically dump the stocks and money with us at the end of the day. We give one side the stock, one side the cash. So we do about $4.7 quadrillion a year in trades. That's what we do. So I'm the COO of technology over here. I'm also have a big tech team that does what's called client technology and middleware. We'll keep it to that for now. So I also did write a book on AI a couple of years ago, which I've kept up to date. Amazon bestseller, luckily, and that's been a fun journey.
Yeah. So I was going to get into that because your book has had you speaking across the US about the topic around AI and achieving impact. Can you share a little bit about the premise of the book and why you wrote it in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, the reason I actually wrote it was because a lot of friends had reached out to me and said, like, you've been doing this for a while. Can you help us understand exactly what's happening in the marketplace? And so for me, I think it's really important that for when you roll out AI for an enterprise, it's not just chasing kind of like the shiny object. It's about having a framework or a structure in place. And for me, I encapsulated that into kind of the AI factory. And so this AI factory has all the pieces you would want, everything from the intake process to the platform to governance to how data fits in to the cultural change to digital ethics. All of that has to be incorporated into one overall approach. So.
Great. All right. So let's get started into the first topic. It's one of my favorites, which is really talking about the enterprise AI pilot graveyard.
Okay.
I think I've heard you speak about previously, and I would love the audience to have the chance to kind of understand a little bit about your perspective on why do some of these pilots that have so much possibility, have so much potential impact, why do so many of them get stuck and don't end up scaling?
Yeah, well, I think, look, a pilot really proves that AI can work.
Yeah.
Production really proves that business can kind of work differently because of AI, and that's kind of the trick. So the
Yeah.
biggest mistake leaders can make is really underestimating everything that comes after the demo, right? Building the model is often the easy part. The hard part is really integrating it with the enterprise data, security, risk controls, workflows, applications, people in the operating process, and then keeping it reliable as the businesses change, which they do all the time.
Yeah.
So the warning signs are everywhere. So like if you actually listen to Gartner, they predicted that about 30% of Gen AI projects are going to be abandoned after proof of concept. We've been seeing that, pretty often. And
Yeah.
so by January 2026, Gartner was reporting that at least 50% of Gen AI projects had been abandoned after POC. So that tells you something important. The graveyard isn't filled with bad technology. It's filled with technology. It never becomes an operating capability. That's why we believe that. That's why I believe that like enterprises need this AI factory approach. And so
Yeah.
that's like a standardized industrial approach that includes data models, infrastructure, governance, all of that. And so there's a company when I was writing my book, I was researching a little bit P&G, and
Yeah.
P&G Health is a great example. So its AI factory was deployed across 80% of its organization. And if you listen to what they say, the company has reported about 10 times faster solution development thanks to their AI factory. So the
Nice.
lesson's pretty simple. Don't build 100 AI pilots. Build a factory that can turn 100 pilots into 100 production systems.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely see that happening. I think a huge part of that as well is there's not that centralized function. I think that's a beautiful thing about AI Factory. I know I've had the chance to work directly with, the HPE and NVIDIA AI Factory team, and I'm super excited about what they're building over there. But I think the key of it is teams are running in multiple different directions as well. And so you're not getting that centralized focus. So there's just like pilot graveyard absolutely everywhere.
And then,
Um,
look, and it's your point. It's meant to be federated, right? You don't want to be saying like everything's got to be centralized. But that being said, you want some control, you want some standardization, or else
yeah.
it just becomes the Wild West. But
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so now that we're talking about pilots, let's move to hype. I think this is, I think this FOMO mentality, this hype cycle that we're in, value versus hype is probably the first part executives need to start with. And as you've led organizations across financial services, some of the biggest organizations in financial services across change, not just AI, but various different technologies that you've deployed. Um, how do we separate hype from impact? Where do we start?
well, I guess I would start with, don't build AI because you're afraid of missing out. You got to
Yeah,
build AI because the business cannot afford not to solve the problem. And a lot of companies, like, AI is just inherent in their DNA, and that's how they think about it.
yeah,
So the organizations winning with AI are remarkably pragmatic. They don't really start with like, what can we put in a chat bot? They start with like, what are we losing in terms of time, money, customers, competitive advantage, and then they establish kind of their baseline. So, like, if an operation costs $100 million a year, can you find $20 million to take out of it? If a process takes 5 days, how do you get it down to 5 hours?
yeah,
So during my time at a global bank, we were targeting about $500 million. We were spending about $500 million in AI investment, and we had
yeah.
about $1.7 billion in expected benefits off the back of that. So the point
Nice.
wasn't really the size of this number, which was dramatic. It was that every single major investment was connected to an economic outcome. And
Yeah.
so, like, AI is really valuable when it stops being really a technology experiment and it's really more about an economic engine and a disruptor within an organization.
Yeah, I love that. Not everyone not everyone has the luxury of that type of strategy from the ground
Yeah.
up. And a huge thing that I'm hearing at the moment is this data as a bottleneck. And as we've known, I've been preaching this for 7, 8 years as an AI data specialist. Data is the lifeblood of AI. And as large enterprises are obviously starting to experiment more, starting to move from pilot into production, gaining access to data is an absolute nightmare. How do we start to remove the bottleneck of data and accessing data, but without kind of putting security and governance as a byproduct of that, or basically putting that aside?
So where I would start is, what's been great about AI is it's really been driving a lot of other good things, from transformation to actually the cleaning up of data. So when I
Yeah.
think about a regulated enterprise like the ones I typically work in, sometimes you really have to slow down to speed up. And I learned that from you, actually. It's something that I know you've kind of proposed many times, and so it's something I've taken into the different organizations I've been in. So I've seen organizations spend months just debating access to data while the business kind of sitting around waiting for an AI solution that could save millions, right? So in one of my early AI journeys, and like I said, I started in probably 2016, I saw data scientists were waiting like up to 9 months to obtain data they needed because you had these restrictive data use councils and kind of processes in place. So we redesigned the whole governance model, moved many of its detailed approvals further downstream, closer to production, where maintaining the appropriate control. So basically, we went from 9 months to about less than 1 month to get these kind of approvals. So it wasn't a technology improvement. It's really an operating model improvement. And that really makes a difference, because AI ready data isn't simply data that exists somewhere in a database. You really have to like have clean sets of data that can be absorbed by consumers, whether that's AI, whether that's analytics or other areas. So Gartner said in 2025 that 63% of organizations either did not have or weren't sure whether they had the right data management in place for AI. That's really critical. So the
Yeah.
way I think about it is, a framework that's pretty common out there called FAIR. So findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And that's got governance embedded into the life cycle rather than kind of being bolted on the end. So the goal isn't really to remove governance around data, because that's critically important. It's to
Yeah.
kind of move governance to the point where it protects the business without really kind of locking it up or paralyzing it, is the way I think about
John, I love a good framework. So fair. We should drop that in a link for
it.
folks, and I can
Yeah.
grab that in the comments afterwards. But
I wish it,
the frameworks to share
I
as
wish
well.
it was like awesome or great or something, but fair is, fair. I'll these days I'll take fair, to be honest with you. I've seen some pretty ugly data.
So this is kind of my last question around, I think, pilots and use cases, before I want to get into a little bit more of the safety and security piece. Everybody has a great idea for AI. I mean, I'm seeing you talked at the start about, a list of 100. I know why 100 seems to be the new use case list number, but there's hundreds of these lists flying around. how do we prioritize which use cases we put into production when resources are so short at the moment? And obviously, data needs to be prioritized for each of those. But like, what advice do you have for executives that are getting these lists from leaders across their business who want to prototype or pilot all of these great ideas? Where do you start?
Yeah, I think everybody has these grandiose ideas, and there's a few things I think about in this space. And so one is kind of stole from Amazon, which is the think big, start small, right? And so and be ruthless about what you stop. And so the biggest portfolio mistake you can really make is treating every single AI idea as important as the other, because it really isn't. So what I like to do is kind of a simple kind of 2 by 2 BCG matrix. And so I
Mm,
think about value versus effort, right? And this concept's been around forever. But it's you have these high value things that are pretty easy to do. So that you should just move on immediately, right? The quick wins. You have these high value things that are a little harder, but they're kind of your big swing for the fences idea. Build those in your strategic roadmap because those are going to make a big difference. Then you got the low value, low effort stuff, and that's you can automate it selectively, and a lot of that tends to be automating manual processes. Then you have the low value, high effort stuff. It's like, why am I going to waste my time at this point? There's so much value to get out of the organization. But there
yeah.
are other questions, all right? There's a question about just as important, like, do we build this at all? So there's a whole build versus buy conversation you could have in this space. So if the capability already exists inside the enterprise or
Yeah.
it's available commercially, like, and building internally creates no strategic differentiation, do you bother building it? So
Yeah.
typically you should ask 3 questions before funding anything. What's the business metric will move? So how much of it will it move and by when?
Okay.
And so, like, an AI strategy isn't just like a list of everything we could do. It's a decision on what we're going to do and what specifically we're not going to do, which is as important.
Okay. Yeah, and I love that. I'll definitely in our summary of this afterwards include those 3 questions. So there's something that I think a lot of folks are overlooking in the industry. I feel like I've been saying it for years, but I would love to like break it down with you here for a second. Traditional AI versus generative AI. It feels like since generative AI broke, that's all everybody's building on. It's all everybody's considering. But I believe that traditional machine learning still has a seat at the table, and I think it's drastically undervalued. How do enterprises balance both, and how can we encourage more folks to consider it?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. And so I've been in organizations. So when I used that use case before around like we were spending 500 million in AI to 1.7 billion in benefit, that was traditional
Mhm.
machine learning. And now I'm doing a ton more stuff focused on Gen AI. It's the hot thing, but to throw that away seems kind of silly. And they're also meant for different use cases. So generative AI is kind of the new superstar, but traditional AI has been doing the heavy lifting, of the factory since the 1950s, right? And so traditional machine learning is still pretty powerful for structure prediction, fraud detection, credit risk, forecasting, pricing, recommendations, demand planning, anomaly detection. You have a lot of the stuff that Gen AI could help with, but some of the more traditional machine learning is much more reliable in those cases. Now,
Yep.
Gen AI changes the game because it can reason over unstructured information, can really generate content, and it creates the interact with tools and workflows. But like this combination, like the pace has been extraordinary of all this change. So this velocity is really, basically requiring us to have new architectures, what I would call evolvability. And that's what you have to think about. So don't build an architecture around today's favorite model. You really got to build it around an architecture that allows you to change models and capabilities and economics as kind of the risks change.
Yep.
So in many cases, I'm seeing this with some of the vulnerability scanning we're doing, like use the smallest, cheapest, and safest model that solves the problem. Use a traditional model where traditional machine learning is superior, and there are already plenty of cases where it is. And use Gen AI where its flexibility creates real value. And where agents and use agents where the system needs to take action rather than simply generate an answer, right? So when I think about this, kind of the winning enterprise won't be the one with the best model. It's going to be the one that can continuously choose the best model for each job. And that changes all the time. And so building that into the way you do things is going to be key.
Yeah, absolutely. While we're talking about use cases, I think this is something you and I have discussed previously, but I would love the opportunity for you to kind of shed some light on the high stakes environments where AI has the most efficiencies. What does a successful scaled use case look like? And yeah, just maybe spend a second on that.
Yeah, and this is the trick, right? Because you hear all these like high level conversations about this stuff, and it's like when
Mhm.
you're actually like a practitioner and your boots on the ground, it makes a huge difference. So the real breakthrough isn't like making AI smarter, and it's pretty smart as it is, and we're not really even taking it, as much advantage as we can of it. It's like making the operation dramatically better. And
Yeah.
so, like if I look at anti-money laundering operations as an example, like traditional rule-based stuff can generate enormous volumes of alert, and many of which ultimately prove to be false positives, right? So Google Cloud noted that more than 95% of the alerts it gets, are more than false positives. And this is like generates tremendous amount for humans and kind of manual workload. Given what we do and the importance of the organization, we have alerts on everything. And so we're constantly like trying to get that balance between what are false positives and what is like true signal to the noise. So when I was at JP, they've been cited as saying they had a 95% reduction in false positives through the use of AI for the AML and fraud detection once implementing AI on top of it.
Nice.
So when you think about like what that means operationally, you're not just saving like a few seconds per employee, you're totally changing the ratio of signal to noise. And so instead of having like thousands of analysts spending their days like chasing alerts that go nowhere, you
Yeah.
can really prioritize the most like total genuine risk, allow humans to spend their time on what matters most. And that's really the power of AI. So I guess the way I would summarize it is like AI really handles volume, and the goal of humans is to really handle judgment. And so the business handles more risk with fewer wasted resources, and that's kind of the goal and really the promise of AI.
Nice. Yeah.
So so I mean we're kind of going down. You would kind of said a little bit of like AI and security and moved away from some of the use cases.
Yeah.
I'd love to, if you're cool with it, like turn the tables on you for a second. So, you have a pretty cool background. I've learned so much from you, and you made it. By the way, you did make it into the book after I did the revision, given that. And I
Thank
apologize.
you.
First time, probably should have given you more credit. But I was recently looking at some of these Gartner studies, which I do a lot. I have a monthly meeting with them, and I
Mhm.
saw that like Gartner is really predicting that like AI governance is going to become like a requirement of all the AI laws by 2027, and that governance is really embedded into 75% of really all our AI platforms, right? So given what we're now seeing around AI vulnerabilities and like agentic systems and attacks such as prompt injection, are we still thinking about AI governance too much as a compliance exercise? Like what does good AI governance really look like with an AI system that can really make decisions in real time? Because that's what I feel to be facing every single day.
Yeah. How long do we have? I know, I'm just joking. I think the biggest shift is governance was always an afterthought, and we saw this we saw this with AI security and security, traditional security back in the day. It's like, oh, we go and build an application, we're ready to deploy it. Oh, now we have to secure it. I think the biggest mistake folks are making is they're treating AI governance as paperwork, a tick the box, versus really thinking about AI as an evolution. AI is in motion, and so your testing, evaluation, verification, and validation systems need to be need to be too. And I think that's what I'm most excited about is now we're starting to see the shift. That Gartner report was actually one of the first that gave a real complete picture where they're able to talk about this, and that's something that my company and everything we've been building on the last couple of years has really been focused on. So it's great to finally see the shift in the market. But as we're going from governance as a gate, I think it's really about governance as a control plane, especially with agentic AI. I mean, it's no longer about is my AI model approved? It really is about how can I have complete view across the stack? It's now accessing permissions across data, all of your tools, right? Anyone that's deploying agentic at scale is really going to start to see a really big shift in that telemetry. I always think about the 4 A's. This is a framework that we built here at Optica Labs where we look at an agentic system across access, autonomy, action, and accountability. So, access is the question of, well, what is it accessing and what can it reach? Autonomy is really thinking about how much autonomy can it decide alone? Does it have to have a human in the loop? How much autonomy am I actually giving my AI agent or agent system? Action is what can it actually do? And lastly, which is the most important, is can we trace it? Can it be explained? And can we stop it when it starts to go awry? And I think that's like a really important frame to start with.
Yeah.
Lastly, John, to even help executives unpack that even more, we created a framework which is called the 6 M's. Well, we help executives understand the agentic journey that they're on. So, firstly, I start with what are you building? So, M1 or M0 would be things like a co pilot, personal productivity tools. You're seeing them blow up on the internet. I don't know if anybody watches like TikTok or any Instagram reels, become a millionaire overnight. You've got these personal productivity tools that can automate all of these great things. But for true enterprise, which is what you're facing, it's really more about task agents, right? Workflow agents, which is M3, multi-agent systems, which is going to be your M4, and then lastly, M5 and 6, which is autonomous systems or semi-autonomous operations. And with every single M that you increase, the complexity gets harder because they need more access, they need more autonomy. They're certainly going to be having a lot more action. And of course, we need more accountability. So that's the part I'm more excited about, is stop treating governance as a tick the box and start thinking about governance as something that's actually monitoring your entire stack and have that visibility across so that you can actually turn that switch off if something goes wrong, or if you can catch a mistake instantly before something catastrophic happens. So I could spend the
Well,
next talking about that, but I don't want to.
well,
I don't
so
want to.
as usual, you're running a little ahead of me when it comes to some of this thinking in the AI space. So I'll be picking your brain about more security and assurance, but definitely great input, things to be thinking about. Thank you.
So we started
I'm,
to kind of talk through.
oh, I like it better when you answer questions than me. It's a little easier.
Stop. Okay, so I think something that's really, really important, and I want to pick your brain on it while I've got you, is really navigating the GPU bottleneck. I'm starting to hear a lot of leaders sort of say, look, we're scaling models. Obviously, as we have infrastructure constraints, we've got physical hardware, supply chain, all of the different issues. How do you navigate the GPU bottleneck? Where do you even start? I'm not even going to get into tokenomics yet. There is another question on tokenomics coming. But where do folks start when they're navigating the GPU issues?
Yeah, when I think about the companies that are actually buying GPUs, like it's the big sovereign nations, it's the big tech companies, it's some of the huge enterprises, but it does impact all of us, right? You can't really build a refinery of the future if you don't have the steel today. And so, like, as AI may look digital, but its foundations really are physical, and we'll stay away from kind of bots or robots and stuff. But GPUs, high bandwidth memory, networking, data centers, electricity, cooling, all that stuff is kind of like core to AI. So the extraordinary demand for infrastructure has created bottlenecks throughout the supply chain. Then you have
Yeah.
things like tariffs and other stuff thrown on top. So like if you look at like recent reporting, there's continued pressure on high bandwidth memory and the supply chain related to that for the next generation of AI accelerators, which have become like increasingly more memory intensive.
Yeah.
And so the simple implication for every CIO is like, don't confuse access to a model with access to AI capability, because you never
Yeah.
know what's going to happen. So if your entire architecture depends on one accelerator or one cloud provider or one model vendor, you have a new form of concentration risk. And so what I like to think about is enterprises have to think about model portability, cloud interoperability, and none of this stuff is easy. Multiple interface options, efficient model routing, workload specific compute, and really
Mm-hmm.
the ability to move workloads around as like the economies and supply chain change.
Yeah.
And you get into the tokenomics piece of it, and yet, yeah, so we actually look at it real time and the cost of it. It's an efficient market. So the objective really isn't to avoid like every vendor, dependence. That's not going to ever happen. The objective is to make sure that your business, like not your infrastructure supplier, really controls our options. And so that takes a lot of work to get there.
So while we're talking about tokenomics, we'd love to spend a couple of minutes on this. I know we've only got 6 minutes left, and I have
Yeah.
like 20 other questions I want to ask you.
Yeah.
There's a huge shift right now. We're moving from fixed software licenses to usage-based pricing. And you're hearing war stories of, oh my goodness, I accidentally left an AI agent on overnight and ended up with $1 million bill. As every prompt, token, and inference has a cost, how do folks think about their tokenomics strategy? Where do executives start? Like, how are you thinking
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah, and the reality is like we've kind of jumped off this cliff and are kind of like putting together the parachute, right? So we've taken a very immature technology and rolled it out at scale. And so
Yeah.
the AI cost model is changing from as part of that, everybody's learning. Like, how many times has Anthropic changed like in recent weeks some of their pricing? But the AI cost model is really changing from buy the software to pay for the work the software
Yeah.
does. So that really fundamentally changes how organizations like govern technology. So
Yeah.
with like traditional SaaS providers, you might buy 10,000 licenses, you know roughly what the annual cost is going to be. With AI, an employee or increasingly like an agent, can consume resources totally continuously. Like the unit of consumption is no longer the seat. It's
Yeah.
really the intelligence you're getting back for that. So that creates a totally new governance problem. So we need to connect AI usage to the business value.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky enough, or fortunate enough to own FinOps in our organization, and so I'm thinking about like how do we like connect this AI to the business value. So it's not enough to know that I spent $1 million on tokens. I need to know like which AI use cases consume them, which business process was supported, what outcomes do they generate, and whether the economics make sense because we're still trying to figure this all out. So I would think I think it's kind of like FinOps for the cloud, but for intelligence. So you need visibility across the tokens, the inference, the models, the agents, the tools, the outcomes, and then you have to have policies that can really automatically intervene when consumption or risk exceeds the thresholds because you can't do this all manually. So
Yeah.
let's imagine you have like an autonomous like customer service agent, which we can choose like a small model costing fractions percent or a frontier model that's 20 times that. Like the governance question simply isn't can the agent use AI? It's like which model is authorized to use for this decision, at which cost, and what is the expected business outcomes. So
Yeah.
that really leads to like this really interesting kind of concept of like AI unit economics, which is
Yeah.
really cost per customer interaction or cost per resolved case or cost per decision, cost per say or like hours saved. And so the
Mm.
organizations that are going to win aren't the ones that are using the cheapest tokens. It's the ones that really can prove that they're buying the right amount of intelligence for like the value they're creating. And so, especially as agents become more autonomous,
Mm.
I think we'll see real economic guardrails becoming important as security guardrails. So the agent being authorized to spend $5 on inference for the task, but requiring an escalation before it can spend $500. And that's something we're seeing within our SDLC, where within these kind of code assistants, you'll cap people at a certain level. And once they hit that threshold, they have the option to be upgraded, but that is a conscious decision. So finally, I would say like tokenomics ultimately turns AI from an IT procurement issue into like an enterprise resource allocation issue. So that
Yeah.
means the CFO, the CIO, the CISO, and AI leadership all need to be part of, sitting at the table. This is really totally a group sport, this whole AI push. I know
I
we're
can
not
see.
out of time here. Sorry.
Yeah, we are out of time, but I have one last question. I can also see questions in the audience, but I want to just a closing question. We spent a lot of time obviously talking about enterprise at scale, which is great. And I think there is so many other branch off topics that we could do an episode on. I just want to hone in a little bit on AI vulnerabilities and cyber risk. Obviously, Anthropic released Mythos, and it's demonstrating that frontier models can discover vulnerabilities, develop exploits while researchers are uncovering these new weaknesses in AI agents themselves. How has AI fundamentally changed the cyber space? And do you have a couple of seconds just to break into
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. Of course. I mean, this is a fun topic we can talk about, and without going into detail, I'm definitely like on the front lines of this. And so, like AI is just not another application that we need to secure. AI is becoming part of the attacker, the attack service, and even the defender. So you have this kind of offensive and defensive aspect of it, and that's a
Yeah.
really profound shift. So like historically, cybersecurity was largely about protecting applications and networks, identities, and kind of the data. Now we have these AI agents that can read email, browse the internet, write code, call APIs, access databases, and can even take actions on behalf of employees. So we move from software that kind of waits around for instructions to software that can make decisions and act. You also are recently in the news about like one large technology provider's agent attacking another. It's pretty crazy. So I would make three changes to how kind of enterprises think about security. First, I would treat every single AI agent as a privileged digital employee. So give it
Yeah.
an identity, least privilege
Mhm.
access, clear entitlements, continuous monitoring. I've talked before about we have KYC right now in a lot of our big, financial organizations. We're going to have KYA, know your agent.
Yeah.
Secondly, I assume the model can be manipulated. Don't
Yeah.
make an entity responsible for enforcing its own security policy. Deterministic controls need to sit outside the model. They need to be around identity, APIs, networks, data, and tools. And then lastly, I'd say third, red team the entire system, not just the model. I know you love this. I know you've created like digital raptors that are attacking and stuff. So test what happens like when an agent receives a malicious email, encounters like a poison content, calls a compromised tool, or attempts to move beyond its boundaries. So for me, it's about like a simple rule for any CEO and like the board to say like, don't
Mm.
ask only like what this AI can do. Ask what could this AI do if it was compromised, and what do
Yep.
we need to do to stop it. So, I mean, it's definitely like a new security architecture we need for this agentic era, and people are working on it as we speak. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it comes down to, I think NIST coined it best: test, evaluate, verify, and validate systems, and do that in motion. I think that's got to be the future. John, as always,
you're still teaching me. You're still teaching me. That's
you're
fine.
incredible, honestly. Thank you for being so transparent today. And, if anyone out there, please follow John, grab his book. It's incredible. And with that, our first episode of You and AI is done. Let's do 8 weeks more of content around how do we build AI that we can trust? With that, thanks, John. And I
Thanks,
will see
Steve.
you soon.
Pleasure as always.